we are going to discuss how can literature confront and reshape imperial narrative, and whether it can contribute to building a more inclusive and just understanding of the world. Our key speakers tonight is Dr. Sadik Rddad, who is going to offer a compelling answer to these questions. Dr. Al-Siddiq is a professor of English and Cultural Studies at Sidi Mohammed bin Abdullah at the University of Fas, Morocco. His teaching and research span cultural studies, post-colonial studies, and Sufism and gender, and he has published widely in all these areas. He is also a recipient of joint supervision doctorate grant from the Moroccan American Commission for Education and Culture Exchange, Fulbright, and a founding member of both Moroccan Cultural Studies Center and Moroccan Cultural Studies Journal. In his book, Dis-Orienting the Maghreb, so Morocco in British and American Travel Writing, the book that we're going to discuss this evening, he analyzed Anglo-American travel writing from 1880s to 1920, showing how it not only constructed imperial images of Morocco, but also contained internal contradictions, ideological tensions, and surprising moments, actually, of resistance. His work challenges the monolithic view of colonial discourses, moving beyond Edward Said's classic work that reveals more nuanced trends shaped by national identity, gender, power dynamics within the imperial system. Responding to Dr. Rddad's presentation, we're honored to have Dr. Lahoucine Aammari. He's Associate Professor of English and Cultural Studies, also at Sidi Mohammed bin Abdullah University in Fas. And his research focused on travel writing, Moroccan ethnicities, Anglo-American relations, and post-colonial literature. He's a co-editor of the volume Mirrors of Morocco, Culture Encounter, and Travel Text, 2023. He's also an associate editor of the Journal of Amany Studies and the book review co-editor of Amany Studies Journal. His forthcoming monograph, British Travel Accounts on Morocco, Discursive Encounters, will be published by Liverpool University Press soon. Congratulations on this. And with their complementary expertise, Dr. Rddad and Dr. Aammari will explore layered discussion on how travel literature shaped and whether it actually still shaped cultural political imagination of Morocco and the wider Maghreb. The literature, as it's written, it's going to be the language of the lecture is English, but of course you're welcome to contribute afterwards in English or Arabic. We also speak Arabic and English, so you can comment and ask questions. This will be after the two presentations. We'll start directly with Dr. Sadik, and afterwards Dr. Hussein will respond to him, and then we'll open the floor to Q&A. And now, without any further ado, Dr. Sadik, the floor is yours. You're muted, Dr. Sadik.
Assalamu alaikum. Sorry about that. Thank you very much indeed, Professor Amany, for inviting me to this forum, to this meeting, to talk about my book. It's a great pleasure. In fact, a real honor to be invited by Ibn Rushd Center. And I hope this is going to be a productive meeting. I will be saying a few things about the book. Of course, it's impossible to speak about the book in a few minutes, but I will try to do my best. So, anyways, let me start by saying that one of the most important aspects of this book is things that Edward Said has overlooked in his book Orientalism. Let me start first by saying that the two things are important to this book. The first one is geography, and the second one is time or history. So, in fact, in the beginning, I titled the book "Time and Geography" because of the importance of these two components. But then I shifted it, of course, thanks to Professor Ali Rddad, who kindly wrote the foreword to this book, but also suggested the title. The title, which is Dis-Orienting the Maghreb, which in fact I like, and I will say a few things first about it. But let me first say that I'm very happy that Professor Aammari is with me here. And in fact, Professor Aammari knows my book probably more than I do. And he told me that he read it probably about 8 times. And I'm very, very happy that he likes it so much that he read it 8 times, but also he kindly wrote an excellent review to this book, and I'm happy that a few reviews had been written about the book in general. So let me say that time and geography are of great importance, and I will explain that later. But let me go a little bit back to the title, Dis-Orienting the Maghreb. And why Dis-Orienting the Maghreb? What's important about Dis-Orienting the Maghreb? The title is very important because the problem with the Maghreb, or Morocco for that matter, is that there are so many travel writings that have been written about Morocco and about the Maghreb, but they have been ignored or overlooked because they are not part of this traditional conventional route that is very, very that is favorable for especially for the British and the American writers. And most of the time, it's the Maghreb came to associated with the French people who wrote about North Africa or about the Maghreb in particular. So I extended my research area to the Maghreb because for me, so the Maghreb is a continuity of the Mashriq, or the Orient, but is not the Orient. And so disorienting means to start rethinking the Maghreb or Morocco outside of the lens of the Middle East. Because Morocco and the Maghreb have lots of distinctive features, lots of differences that should be brought to the surface. These differences that are historical, cultural, linguistic, ethnic, and so on and so forth, that are overlooked in the representation of the Middle East. So for me, the most important thing is that we need to go beyond understanding the Maghreb, as I've said, through the lens of the Middle East. And also the other problem that we have, that the travel writings and literature in general, they have been overlooked because most of the time the Africanists or the researchers or the scholarship on Africa have generally overlooked the Maghreb because it is part of the Middle East, and the Orientalists have overlooked the Maghreb because it is part of the Middle East, and so we are lost in between. and here came the for me the importance, the reason why I chose to write on this part of Africa or the Arab world that has been understudied and overlooked by both, as I've said, the Orientalists and the Africanists. So this is one of the reasons why I wrote this book. The other reason is that generally Edward Said's Orientalism has completely overlooked Morocco. There's almost no mention or very little mention of Morocco in his work Orientalism. And the other thing that is important about that is also missing in the work of Edward Said, apart from geography, apart from the Maghreb, is time. Temporality is of great importance. So I looked at two important time shifts, the late 19th century and the early 20th century. So my book starts from Philip Trotter's Our Mission to the Court of Morocco, as he calls it, Morocco, 1880, and ends with Edith Wharton's In Morocco, 1920. In the beginning, this choice might look very arbitrary, but for me, it is of great importance because it helps me look at the shifts, the discursive shifts that happened between the late 19th century and the 20th and the early 20th century. That is to say, the travel narratives that were written in the late 19th century have some specificities that we don't find in travel writing in the early 20th century. And I look at these shifts, these temporal shifts, in terms of nationalism, secularism. Of course, gender is of great importance to me, which has been also overlooked by Edward Said. So gender is important, time is important, geography is important, but also, as I've said, the idea that is at the heart of this study is how, for example, if we take temporality, I take in fact 1904 as a very important time, which shows the shifts between a discourse that informed the late 19th century and another discourse, a different discourse that informed the early 20th century. So in 1904, when the superpowers, the European superpowers, decided that Morocco should go to France and that Britain and Italy and Germany have completely overlooked this process of colonizing Morocco because in the 1904 in the Entente Cordiale, in this agreement, this secret agreement, that Morocco should go to the French and the northern part of Morocco should go to the Spanish, and that Egypt would have a free hand in it, and that Britain would have a free hand in Egypt. So now that we know that the colonial powers know that Morocco went into the hands of the French and the Spanish, now the colonial discourse which informed, or the nationalist discourse which informed the late 19th century started receding in the 20th century, because now in the beginning, in the late 19th century, before Morocco went to the French and the Spanish, every country was advancing a very important discourse, which is the nationalist discourse. That is to say, uh, Morocco, for the British, Morocco should be colonized by the British. So if you are a British travel writer, your travel narrative uh, stresses the idea that it's the British that should have the right, the legitimate right to colonize Morocco, because they are much more advanced, much more civilized than the rest of the European countries, for that matter, uh, Spain and France. Um, the imperial discourse, or the colonial discourse in the late 19th century, was informed by a nationalist discourse, very narrow nationalist discourse. So for me, the imperialism and nationalism came together in the late 19th century, and they were strongly promoted by the travel writers. So different travel authors, as I've said, if you are French, you advance the argument that the French should colonize Morocco, and if you're British, it should be the British. It's the British that should colonize Morocco, and if you're Italian, it should be the Italians who should colonize Morocco, and so on and so forth. And so this is termed, in fact, I chose the term priority discourse. For example, the British priority discourse. That is to say, the British travel writers, especially Philip Trotter's Our Mission to the Court of Morocco in 1880, advances, as I said, this argument that the British have a priority discourse. That is to say, it's their right, it's their legitimate right to colonize Morocco, because they are much more civilized, as I've said, than any other of the countries that I mentioned. And so the civilization cannot be carried by the French or by the Spanish, because the Spanish are themselves backward. And when you read, for example, the travel narratives that were written in the late 19th century by the Britishers, by British travel writers, you find out that the stereotypes between European countries, like between, for example, between Britain and the other countries like France or like Italy or like Spain, it's the same stereotypes that we have. The same stereotypes we have about Africa or about Asia are the same stereotypes that the British in travel writing in the late 19th century have about Spain or France. So the Spain, like the Moroccans, like the Africans, like the Asians, are backward, uncivilized, bloody, fierce, and live in the past. And the British are much more sophisticated, much more advanced, and they have human values that they should, in fact, share with the rest of the world. Which, as I've said, legitimates their colonial endeavor. But after 1904, as I said, when Morocco, we know that Morocco fell into the hands of Spain and France. Afterwards, the travel narratives that were written after that, for example, Edith Wharton or Holt, for example, the travel narratives have advanced a different discourse, which does not justify French colonialism or British colonialism or American colonialism. It justifies colonialism per se. So if you write after 1904 or after the colonization of Morocco, after the colonialism or the protectorate was sealed in 1912. Now, after 1912, if you are a travel writer and you write, then the idea of nation and nationalism starts to recede in favor of a broader sense of colonialism. So they defend colonialism, but not, for example, British colonialism or French colonialism. So this is a major shift in colonialism from a parochial, narrow, nationalist discourse to a broader discourse which legitimates the civilizing mission, irrespective of which nation is going to colonize. So this is a major shift that was, in fact, that was overlooked by Edward Said, who looks at sees that that there is one West, one text. That is to say, he does not, in fact, he does not give lots of importance. He does to some extent. He looks at the differences, for example, between French colonialism, British colonialism, and American colonialism, but he does not go into detail about how they differ, especially when it comes to their attitude to the colonial enterprise and how they are affiliated to colonial enterprise. Generally, the people who studied Morocco, like philosophers, historians, researchers in general, they would choose some periods that, for example, 1830, 1912. They start generally with the conquest of Algiers in 1830, and the protectorate in Morocco in 1912. Some others would choose 1830 and 1944. 1944, 1830 again the conquest of Algiers, and 1944 with the rise, the self-conscious rise of a real struggle for independence in Morocco. But for me, I chose 1880 and 1920, which is a period that is less studied. That is less studied by historians, by scholars, by philosophers, and this is in fact what gives this book its distinctive, some of its, what I think is its distinctive merit. And so when we look, for example, if I chose 1912 and 1956, which I did in the beginning when I started writing this book, I chose this time period, 1912, 1956, a period which, in spite of the extensive mutations and transformations brought in by the French in their interaction with traditional Morocco, could be at least apparently seen as a homogeneous temporal unit. So I tried to avoid any homogeneous temporal units, 1912, 1956. So I changed my mind and focus, because I thought that this study would turn out into an undesirable consecration of the sense of continuity and temporal unity of travel writing as a vehicle of knowledge production about Morocco. So this is the initial, my initial, what in fact triggered this timeline, but also this work as a whole, or the book as a whole. For this reason, I have chosen to include the end of a century, and the end of a century and the beginning of another century. So 1880, 1920. So I wanted to stress change and to stress discontinuity by stressing the sense of an ending and the sense of a beginning, and as such to underscore the effect of history and the subsequent change in temporality on textual representation of a geographical location, which is Morocco. So while history and time are central to this study, I stress geography, as I've said in the beginning, both real and imaginative, as a component and a basis of discursive difference and continuity. So one of the most important things that I try to do is to use this word that has been used by Ali Rddad, departure. I wanted to depart from, so to depart means to start from, to start from what has been studied, like Morocco, this geography and this temporality, but to go beyond it, to stress this sense of discontinuity and the importance of temporality in the representation of Morocco. Because I found out that generally the writings about Morocco, about Morocco or about the Maghreb in general, about the Middle East, the MENA regions, are homogeneous. So I tried to, if I may use this word, to dehomogenize, to look at things from a not from a monolithic, unified perspective, but rather from a heterogeneous perspective, to stress this notion of difference, temporal and geographical. The other thing, because of this importance of geography, is that hundreds of travels to Morocco either suffer utter academic amnesia or they are understudied at best. The argument this book makes is that these travels have been so far undermined because they are not inscribed within the conventional, more tracked routes of Western travel writing, especially Anglophone travel writing. Travel criticism has unfortunately followed a misleading mainstream trajectory and subsequently resulted in myopia, as it has focused almost exclusively on travels to locations as varied as the Americas, Asia, East and South and East Africa. So for people who are familiar with travel writing, especially Anglo-Saxon or Anglophone travel writing, generally it's these locations that are that come time and again. It's the Americas, Asia, East and South and West Africa. Travel narratives on these geographical regions are closely and generously discussed in Anglo-American scholarship, including, as I've said, the work of Edward Said that has been misleading for so many people. To do Edward Said some justice, I find out, however, that Edward Said makes up for this neglect of the Maghreb in his cultural imperialism, where he gives some importance to Algeria, to some extent to Morocco, but also to Sudan, and where he would give importance, for example, to the work of Tayyib Saleh, موسم الهجرة إلى الشمال, because generally in people who criticize Edward Said think that he did not give voice to the natives. So he tried to make up for this neglect when he started looking at the work of people like Tayyib Saleh, but also other writers from the not from the West, but from the Arab region or from the Maghreb. So this is these are some of the things that this book came to be interested in. But I think that also the some of the things that I tried to show, even when it comes to the etymology of the words Maghreb and Mashriq, what I tried to show is, as I've said, the Maghreb is a continuity of the Mashriq, but it is not the Mashriq. And even in terminology, Maghreb is the far west, that is the further west, and the Mashriq is the sunrise, literally sunrise is the east, and the Maghreb is in fact the West, and of course, but of course in Orientalism, when we talk about the West and the East, it's more about cultural geography than physical geography. But because in physical geography, Morocco is to the west of almost every single European country. So what I also tried to do is there's something that has been neglected when people started to be interested in the Maghreb, when people started to be interested in the Maghreb, they were more interested in the late part of the 20th century, the late 20th century, or mainly starting from the Gulf crisis, but also the oil crisis in the 1970s, and so lots of people who studied Morocco started to study Morocco within this strategic conflict between the West and the rest. So, for example, people like Brian Edwards engages American representations of the Maghreb from 1942 to 1973, and how America's knowledge, imaginary or real, of the Arab was centered in the Maghreb before it shifted to the Middle East. So lots of studies were done 1973 and after 1973, but Brian Edwards made up for this vacuum, for this gap, by stressing this period 1942 and 1973, starting from his idea that the 20th century is an American century, following Henry Luce in his 1941 statement that the 20th century is an American century. And of course, in the 20th century, America is going to champion Orientalism, or interest in the Orient, to take up or to after Europe. So my argument is that the 19th century is a European century. The 20th century is an American century. Brian Edwards was interested in 1942, 1973. So what I find missing is this period between, as I've said, 1880 and 1920. And so I tried to make up for this vacuum in scholarship on Morocco, but also on the Maghreb, and to some extent on the Middle East. So these are some of the reasons why I chose these periods, and then in fact, what I tried to do in the book as a whole is to trace 4 turns, or 4 rhetorics, 4 major turns from 1880 to 1920. So I call them also major shifts, which characterize travel writing's production of knowledge in the late 19th and early 20th century, which is an era that started placing Morocco in the narrative of Western civilization. So the first turn, or the first rhetoric, considers the ways in which Philip Durham Trotter, Our Mission to the Court of Morocco, 1880, foregrounds a parochial, patriotic rhetoric founded on the notion of the British priority discourse. So this is the first nationalist discourse. And the nationalist discourse, the way it works in the texts, the way it works in travel narratives, is I followed some of the concepts that have been used by people like Christopher Miller, who talks about the idea of the blank darkness. That is to say, when the West encountered the East, or encountered Africa, for example, or the East in general, or the Orient in general, so they departed from the idea that Africa, for example, is an empty lot. So dark blankness. So it's a dark blankness, or a soft wax. So these are the terms that he uses, a soft wax, when it comes to human beings, and an empty space, a dark blankness, And this dark blankness is going to be, which is empty, so it's an empty space, which is going to be filled in regarding the nationalist and the imperial motivations of a country. Like, so, for example, Africa is an empty lot, and when the British came, they write about Africa as though it were as I've said, empty, it's a vacuum, and they filled it with their own colonial desires. And the best example that can be given here is Robinson Crusoe. When Robinson Crusoe came to Juan Fernandez Island, and he met up this guy, this man in the middle of nowhere, who was for him a cannibal. When he met him, um, he didn't ask him what his name was. He told him from now on, because he met him on a Friday. Of course, Friday for the West, but not for in Britain. It's called Friday. We don't know what the people in Juan Fernandez Island call it, but Robinson Crusoe, because he is the colonizer, he is the master. He doesn't ask this guy his name. He told him from now on, your name is Friday. And he taught him English, and the English he taught him the language he taught him is a colonial language. Of course, there is no colonial language because languages were there before colonialism, but the way it came to be associated with Robinson Crusoe is that it became ideological, in the sense that he taught him how to say master, and to say yes, and so to his master. So, before Robinson Crusoe came to Juan Fernandez Island, the island does not exist. People do not exist, or their identity does not exist, and so it's the British that fill in this empty space and this past with what they want it to be. That is to say, they reduced it into a situation of a master and slave, and a situation as it is known, and people are scholars on travel writing. They call this trope the Lord of all I see. When Robinson Crusoe is in the island, he says, "I am Lord, I am King of all I see. Anything that comes under my eye is mine." So I'm also, or I am the Lord of all I survey. So anything that comes under the imperial eye, the eye of the colonizer, becomes their possession. And so this trope of empty space was also reproduced in this narrative, Our Mission to the Court of Morocco, where the traveler does not, in fact, reproduce the past of Morocco or the history of Morocco, but imposes one on Morocco. And this one that he imposes is one that fits in the imperial motivations of of uh, of the British, not of the West in general, but of nationalist motivations, nationalist imperial motivations of Britain, as opposed to any other European country. Something that is also very important about this narrative, Our Mission to the Court of Morocco, is that in this mission that was led by the ambassador of Britain in Morocco, John Drummond Hay. He came with his wife and with his daughter, Miss Hay. And in fact, when you read the whole narrative, people do not pay attention to the role of Miss Hay. Because that's in fact what people like Mary Louise Pratt calls the anti-conquest hero. That you have the impression that this British little girl is innocent and has no role in the colonial enterprise. But when you reread it and you rethink the position, the role of this little girl, with seemingly an innocent girl, you find out that she is in fact affiliated to the colonial enterprise, showing how gender matters also in the colonial enterprise. The idea is that when this little girl came, she started collecting plants, and these plants that she was sending back to a botanist, to a scientist, a botanist in Britain. And the plants, the Moroccan plants, the native plants of Morocco, do not take Moroccan names. They go to Britain, and in Britain they are given names that are British names, so that this what Pratt calls planetary consciousness, or anyways, it's a long story, but which I'm going to cut short. Starting from 1750, there's this botany or natural science came to be strongly associated with colonialism, but in a way that makes it look innocent, because it's a science that has nothing to do with knowledge about the West. It looks neutral. In fact, it is not neutral. But the idea of the collection of the plants of Morocco and giving them names, just like I said, just like Robinson Crusoe, where he gives him his name and depriving him of his initial identity and his history. So with the plants, by giving names, by giving names to the plants of Morocco, and erasing all the history of the planetary system of Morocco. In fact, this helps bring Morocco into the language of the West. That is to say, bring Morocco into the Western orbit, and effacing as such the entire history of Morocco, the entire even in identity of Morocco. And so something that looks very neutral, that looks scientific, is in fact in service of colonialism. Just like in the later on, for example, when we look at the production of knowledge, if we still keep in the context of Morocco, for example, in the 20th century, the sociologists who came to studied Morocco. When we look at the studies, you have the impression that these are scientific sociological studies, but in fact, sociology, as we call it, colonial sociology, was in service of colonialism, because the moment you know the place, the moment you know the geography, and you know almost everything about the ethnicities and the languages in Morocco, then so this knowledge, this legacy, this colonial legacy, the sociological legacy that has been collected by the sociologists, who are supposedly innocent and neutral, the colonial administration of the French used it within what they call divide and rule policy. So we have to know that in Morocco we have two major languages, Amazigh and Arabic, and to know that we have two major ethnicities. This helped the French administration to start this pacification, and to make the penetration of the French in Morocco much smoother. So it's this knowledge, this prior knowledge, which looks innocent, is in fact is made in service of colonialism, just like natural science, like botany, in the case of our mission to the court of Morocco, was made in service of the colonizer. The second,
Dr. Sadik,
yeah.
sorry for interrupting you, but please could you come to a conclusion where just because of the time, يعني.
Okay, so anyways, I'm going to just in a couple of minutes, I would just say that the other thing, the other turn that is of great importance to me is the secular turn, and also it's the secular turn, but also the gender turn. And I examined Francis McNabb's A Ride in Morocco in 1902 to underscore the supremacy of the secular intent of colonialism over the religious and missionary channels in the dissemination of modernism. In fact, people like Francis McNabb made use of, or she advances the idea that if we want to make colonialism easier and smoother in Morocco, we have to attack the work of the missionaries, because the work of the missionaries is going to help widen the gap between the natives and the Westerners. And so for her, it should be the liberal values, human rights, women's rights, ethnic right, or religious rights that should be advanced for a better advancement on Morocco. So she uses secularism to advance on Morocco without the tensions that can be brought in by religion. The third turn is the transnational turn. The transnational turn, and I examined the work of George Edmund Holt, Morocco, the Pican, 1914, in terms of the cultural and ideological transformations of discursive forms in the USA and Morocco in the era of transnationalism. The idea is that I examined the work of George Edmund Holt at a time when Morocco and America were going transnational, because this is a moment where America, in fact, is going beyond its moral policy to adopting another policy, which is the open door policy, which seeks to give America a place in the world, and not to be it's in fact to go beyond the isolationist policy of America and to start to elbow its way into the world, and to start this ascendancy, the American ascendancy in world politics. And the last one discusses, in fact, Edith Wharton's In Morocco, 1920. And this chapter reveals the anxieties of a discourse trapped between the advocacy of American nationalism and French colonialism. So in this, very briefly, in Edith Wharton's In Morocco, the important point is that Edith Wharton, in fact, invites America to go, as I've said, beyond its isolationist policy, and it invites America to go and to start to find its own way into the international landscape. But more importantly, the idea is that she is American. She is American, and she justifies and legitimates French colonialism as opposed to the late 19th century, where you have a very parochial, very narrow nationalist patriotic perspective. In the work of Edith Wharton, in fact, is there to she has a propagandistic imperial desire, in which she justifies not only American colonialism but colonialism per se. And I would just like to end by saying that, however, for Edith Wharton, the most important thing is that she does not say that America should not colonize, but for her, America is in the waiting room of colonialism. America should start the imperial process, but when it is ready, now it is in the waiting room of colonialism. When America is ready, they are going to go beyond this isolationist policy and start colonizing. I don't want to take more time, but one of the things that is very important is that there are lots of echoes between what happened in the work of Edith Wharton in 1920 and what Donald Trump was saying a few months ago when he was talking about his claim of Greenland and Canada. In fact, which look as something new, but in fact, for historians, and for people who are interested in the history of America, in the contemporary history of America, we know that this goes back to 1898 when America started. In fact, especially with the crisis of Cuba and the crisis of the Philippines in 1898. So this discourse about taking lands is not new to Trump, but it has been there all the time, and there were lots of conflicts between two major wings, especially in the beginning of the 20th century in America, between the liberals who think that America should not go beyond its borders, and those people who think that in fact America should have a foothold, especially in the Mediterranean. And thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sadik, for this enlightening lecture. I'm really sorry to interrupt you, but this only for the sake of the time. I read my book, your book myself, and I know how thick is the book and how deep and how there are many concepts that could be new for many researchers or scholars listening to us, watching us tonight. But I assume we will have more time to for their question, and we can even deepen many of the concepts that they would like more information and elaboration on. I myself have some questions, but anyway, I will just postpone them for the time. And Dr. Al-Hussein, now the floor is yours. Please brief 20 minutes maximum.
Okay, assalamu alaikum. Good evening, everybody. So thank you very much, Professor Amany and Professor Suzanne, for coordinating this very interesting and wonderful event. And I congratulate again my colleague and my colleague, Professor Sadik Rddad, for this wonderful piece and and very interesting and very indispensable and fascinating source in the field of child writing and post-colonial studies. So Sadik Rddad's book, Dis-Orienting the Maghreb, is very interesting and very fascinating, because when we look at the French tradition language, so Sadik tries to fill this gap, because different monographs and dissertations that have been published about Morocco are about French, because of this relationship between Morocco as an erstwhile colonized country by the French and the Spanish. So, Sadik's monograph is very interesting, as I already said, but I'm going because Sadik, covered, different things, so not to fall in the trap of repetition. So I'm going to proceed other ways. So, as Professor Sadik Rddad stated, so we have many tropes that are very important in his book. So first of all, we have, for example, time, geography, nation, history, let's say gender, and so on and so forth. So, but when we talk about this monograph, there is the importance of this idea of periodization. So periodization is very important. So this monograph can be inscribed within this time frame between 1880 and 1920. So the first travel writer that Sadiq analyzed in his monograph is Philip Durham Trotter, who wrote his very interesting travel log, Our Mission to the Court of Morocco, in 1880, and this time coincided with the Madrid conference, or to call the Treaty of Madrid Conference, which Hassan the First, Sultan Moulay Hassan, was the first Hassan, the Sultan Moulay Hassan requested, and he invited many different European countries in order to discuss this issue of the protege system. So Philip Durham Trotter kept company with the famous and the influential figure in the Anglo-Moroccan relations, John Drummond High. John Drummond High was spent about 4 decades in Morocco, and he did a great job in Morocco, and he tried to change the historical well in the Mediterranean, and especially in Morocco. So Our Mission to the Court of Morocco, it was written in 1880, as I told you before, and it can be inscribed within this nationalist turn, because all those 12 writers who came to Morocco at that time, they wrote the accounts, so we have different travelers who came from different walks of life. So we have anthropologists, sociologists, historians. That's why travel writing is interdisciplinary. So we have different anthropologists, sociologists, we have spies, we have military men, we have soldiers, and we have even laymen who came to Morocco and wrote their accounts. So Philip Durham Trotter account can be inscribed within this nationalist turn, and within those discourses that were circulating at that time, which means the nationalist turn, the imperialist turn, as well as the capitalist, capitalism, imperialism, nationalism. So, but his discourse was in some ways was disrupted by the native voices, because at that time, as I told you before, this importance of periodization, because the end of the 19th century was a colloquy of many different historical phases. The first one was in 1830. That's the beginning of the French colonization of Algeria and the defeat of the Moroccan troops in the Lahoucine battle, in the Isli battle, and the convention of Lahoucine in the border between Morocco and Algeria. So Morocco grew, so they kind of hated, the foreigners, especially the French and the Spanish and the British. So we have the discourse, or the discourse that this nationalist and the imperialist discourse that Philip Durham Trotter tried to endorse, because we have this idea of what we call the Royal Geographic Society. So all these accounts were written within a particular framework. So this discourse was to some extent disrupted by the return gaze of Moroccans. So what Michel Foucault called heterotopia. So we have this margins, spatial margins by the natives who try to write back to this discourse that was circulating at that time. So Philip Durham Trotter, when you read his accounts, Our Mission to the Court of Morocco, so we have this idea of what Sadik Rddad called priority discourse. So he said that the English should colonize Morocco, not the French, not the Spanish, but the English or the British should colonize Morocco. And we have many others that other travel writers who blamed the British because of their, let's say, because they were, according to them, they were short-sighted, and the French outmaneuvered them and were able to, let's say, okay, to colonize Morocco after 1904, especially with the Entente Cordiale between the French and the British, when the French, okay, they agreed to that French will take Morocco and the British will take Egypt. So that's the first okay turn. So okay, Sadiq okay talked about the second one, which is the secular turn, what we call second okay secular shift, paradigm shift, which is very important. And Frances McNabbs, in her book A Ride in Morocco Among Believers and Traders, she visited Morocco in 1902, and in her book she tried to emphasize this idea of secularism. That is to say, she was against, because at that time we have different ways of, let's say, discovering or exploring Morocco. So we have also a missionary, so we have missionaries. So she was against this idea of evangelization and proselytization of Morocco, because according to her, these proselytizing and evangelizing process is hollow, because we need to import civilization, humanism to Morocco, because according to her, these missionaries, they were fake, because they not try to, let's say, so she was against, and she criticizes the Christians who tries to convert Moroccans at that time. So she focuses on secular aspects in her turn. So regarding this period is very important to talk about this idea. As I told you before, periodization is very important. So 1904, this is the Entente Cordiale. So we can talk about this this period between two phases. So we have pre-colonial phase and, let's say, colonial phase. Okay, pre-colonial phase from 1880, which means the Madrid Conference, up till 1912, the imposition of the French and Spanish protectorates in Morocco, and after, which means after this period, 1912. So we will focus on, let's say, the American this travel writer George Edmund Holt, in his book Morocco the Piquant. So Edmund Holt focuses on this idea of the transnational turn or shift, as Sadiq tribalized it. And this talk about the different phases in Morocco, both for Morocco and for America. And the last turn is in 1920, with the last one, female travel writer and novelist Edith Wharton, in her book In Morocco. So Edith Wharton, she is a rabid imperialist actually, and she endorsed the French. She did her best in order to endorse the French colonialism in Morocco, and she did a great job by let's say, by endorsing the General Leoty's policy in Morocco. And she stated that General Leoty was a magician in Morocco, because he did a great job in Morocco by taking Morocco from prehistorical phase to civilization, progress, and all those, let's say, pompous tropes and concepts that is deeply rooted in colonial discourse. So Edith Wharton, like many other, not only just American travel writers, but also even British travel writers who came after the protectorate, so they endorsed the French colonialism. For example, Wyndham Lewis in his book Journey into Barbary. So the same, okay, the same job. So according to Edith Wharton, the Americans should, let's say, should invite Americans to embrace this idea of going beyond this idea of isolationism. And she stated that the French and the Spanish are good models that the Americans should follow in order to, to be in as Professor Rddad said, waiting room for colonialism and let's say and colonization of other countries. So these are the main turns and paradigm shifts that Professor Rddad trivializes and coins in his book. And as I told you, we have different monographs, but we need more works. We need more works and studies about different different historical periods, especially during the 19th century. We have many dissertations and monographs, but I think that Sadik Rddad did a great job by focusing on these three travel writers, two Americans and two British, two females and two males. And this period is very important. And as I told you, we have different periods. For example, we can talk about the period 1856 to, that's the beginning of the let's say the convention, the commercial convention between Morocco and Britain. And for example, 2027, for example, that's the time frame of my forthcoming book. So this is, which means the beginning of the convention and the end of this convention. And there are many travel writers. British and American ones, that should be explored and brought to the fore, so as to be trying to discover this archival, let's say, treasure, in order to know more about Moroccan history, especially the Anglo-American Moroccan relations, especially in the 19th century. So, as I told you before, Sadiq's monograph is very interesting, because actually we have different historical books in this idea of Anglo-Moroccan relations, but in the part of history, for example, Professor Khalid Mansour's pieces about the Anglo-Moroccan relations. But Sadik Rddad's monograph remains one of the most sources for master and PhD students and Moroccan scholars and the Maghrebi scholars in general, because it gives us different ways of analyzing. That's very interesting, because when you read Rddad's book, we have the way he tries to textually and critically analyzes these texts. That's very important. That's going to be a kind of inspiration for other scholars. And I get, that's I told, that's when you, if you remember at the beginning of this this meeting, Professor Rddad stated that this book is very fascinating to the extent that I read it many times, because it's kind of inspiration for to help me to as a kind of model to read and analyze other travel texts. So I congratulate Professor Sadik. I'm going to congratulate him again and again, and thank you very much, because I tried to be as brief as possible, because unless Sadik Rddad's let's say Sadik Rddad's covered much of the of what's going to be discussed in the book. And thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hussein and Dr.